My name is Brittany Doyle. I'm 30 years old, born and raised in San Diego, California. I live alone now in a one-bedroom apartment that overlooks a narrow alleyway and a jacaranda tree that blooms with lavender-colored petals for exactly 3 weeks every April. I have a cat named Bishop, a coffee habit I'm not sorry for, and a job that requires me to ask hard questions no one wants to hear. By profession, I'm a tech ethics consultant. Which means, depending on who you ask, I'm either a necessary moral compass or a self-righteous buzzkill. My role is to sit in between developers, executives, and policymakers, poking holes in things like algorithmic bias, user manipulation, or surveillance creep. I know. Not exactly Sunday dinner conversation. But I didn't choose this job for dinner conversations. I chose it because growing up, I was always the one raising her hand at the wrong time. Always the one asking, but is that fair? Is that really okay? And I've paid for it. Over and over. Especially in my family. If I had to sum up my relationship with my family in one word, it would be uneven. Not dramatic or explosive. Not violent or scandalous. Just stone-sided. Like watering a plant that never grows. Giving, and still feeling like you're not quite wanted in the photo. I'm the middle child, but not really. My older half-sister, Rachel, is from Dad's first marriage. She's 8 years older than me, lives in Chicago, works in marketing, and has twins who call my parents Nana and Papa like they were born into royalty. Rachel has always been distant, formal. She sends flowers on Mother's Day and signs her cards with everyone's full names, including the dog's. Then there's Max, my younger brother. The golden boy. Football captain turned finance bro turned new dad. He married his college sweetheart, Claire, and together they embody every glossy family newsletter you've ever rolled your eyes at. Max never had to try to be included. He just showed up, and the world clapped. As for me, I've always felt like a background character in my own family's story. I was the artsy one, the sensitive one, the one with too many opinions and too few filters. I wasn't rebellious, I just asked too many questions. About why we never visited Mom's side of the family. About why Rachel was allowed to skip Christmas one year, but I got a guilt trip for missing Thanksgiving. About why Max's bad day got empathy while mine got silence. Still, I tried. For years. I called every Sunday. Sent personalized gifts. Organized birthday surprises. I flew back for holidays even when I couldn't afford the time off. I showed up again and again even when it meant swallowing back tears in the guest bathroom after someone made a dig about woke nonsense or joked that I'd probably write an ethics memo about turkey carving. And they'd laugh. Because it was always a joke when it was about me. To be fair, things weren't always like this. When I was a kid, before Rachel moved away, before Max got all the attention, before Mom started getting tired, so often it was quieter. I remember afternoons curled up on the carpet with crayons, drawing calendars by hand. Mom would hang them on the fridge, crooked and colorful. Back then, my name was on every page. My face in every photo. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. Gradually, then unmistakably. And now? Now I find out I've been cropped from the family calendar. Literally. It happened 2 weeks ago. I wasn't even supposed to see it. My cousin Annie forwarded me a photo from the Family Core WhatsApp group, which I didn't know existed, by the way. She sent it with a nervous emoji and a short message. Did they seriously not include you? I tapped the image, expecting to see something minor. Maybe a weird crop, maybe a layout issue. Instead, I saw it. The March page. My birthday month. And I wasn't in it. Not even a corner of a childhood picture. Not a note, not a quote, not a single acknowledgement that I was part of this family at all. Meanwhile, Max had 2 full pages owned for his daughter's baptism, and 1 for their first Christmas as a family. Rachel had 1 featuring her twins on a beach, complete with a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. Even our family dog, Buster, who died 5 years ago, had a throwback photo in October. But me? Nothing. I zoomed in, hoping I was wrong. Maybe I missed something, maybe I was in the background. A candid. A blur. Nope. Just gone. Annie tried to play it down. Maybe it was a mistake? But I knew better. Being excluded once is an oversight. Being excluded repeatedly, systematically, silently, that's a choice. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone across the room. I just sat there in the quiet, staring at the screen, and something shifted in me. Something brittle snapped. Not a breakdown. A breakthrough. Maybe I'd never fit into their calendar. But what if I made my own? A real one. A different one. One for people like me, cutouts, the cropped, the quiet disappointments, the ones who showed up anyway. The ones who were told in 1,000 little ways, "You don't belong here. What if I gave us a place?" And that's when the idea was born. The funny thing about moments that change you forever is how quiet they are. No lightning bolt, no dramatic soundtrack swelling in the background, just a soft, sickening stillness, like the air right before a storm breaks. That's how it felt when I scrolled through that calendar photo for the 5th time, hoping against reason that I had simply missed myself in some corner, that my eyes were playing tricks, that maybe just maybe they'd included me on a different month, and Annie had only sent the March spread by accident. But she hadn't, and I hadn't missed anything. I wasn't there. I called Mom that night. I don't know what I expected. An apology? A flustered explanation? Maybe even a lie, something so absurd that I could scoff and move on. But what I got was worse than all of that. What I got was indifference. "Oh, that," she said, her voice distant, like she was folding laundry or checking the oven timer while I cracked in half on the other end of the line. "Sweetheart, it's just a calendar." Claire put most of it together with Max. Just a calendar. I blinked hard and pressed the phone tighter to my ear, like I could squeeze something else out of the moment. Like if I just stayed present long enough, she'd remember I was her daughter and that this mattered. "But you saw it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my throat was starting to close. "You saw they didn't include me at all." Silence. A sigh. Then, "It's not that deep, Brittany. You know Max is better at organizing these kinds of things. And you haven't exactly been around." I swallowed hard, the insult sharp and casual, tossed like a breadcrumb in a forest that had never wanted me walking through it in the first place. "I haven't been around because you stopped inviting me," I said, and now my voice shook, not from rage, not even from hurt anymore, but from the weight of finally saying it out loud, like dragging a rotten beam into the light. "You created a group chat without me. You have dinners and birthdays and trips that I find out about after the fact. Do you even realize how that feels?" Another pause. Then the worst part, her tone, flat and tired, the tone she used when she was done pretending. "Brittany, you always make things harder than they have to be." And there it was. Not anger. Not confrontation. Just dismissal. That conversation didn't last much longer. I told her I needed to go, and she said okay, and we hung up like strangers do when the awkwardness outweighs the need to pretend they care. I sat on the floor for a long time afterward, my back pressed against the kitchen cabinet, Bishop circling my legs like he could sense the ache but not reach it. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, thinking about all the years I'd spent trying to be seen, trying to do enough, say enough, be enough. Thinking about all the times I sent personalized gifts while everyone else bought Amazon cards. The times I rearranged my freelance deadlines to make it to Claire's baby shower, to Max's birthday dinner, to Dad's retirement brunch. The years of showing up to a family that only ever made me feel like a footnote in their headline. The next day, I got a text from Max. "Hey. Mom said you were upset about the calendar. It wasn't personal, okay? Claire was on a deadline and we just used the best photos we had on hand. Hope you're good." No, sorry. No acknowledgement. Just a thin layer of politeness glazed over complete disregard. I stared at the message, thumbs hovering over the keyboard, not knowing whether to scream or laugh or disappear. Instead, I typed, "Thanks for the clarification. I'll make sure I'm not in any photos going forward, makes editing easier." And then I muted the thread. That same afternoon, I got an email from HR at a company I'd consulted for the year prior. They wanted to publish a feature about ethical design in their new online journal, and they were asking if I'd be open to contributing a visual piece, something human-centered. I nearly deleted it out of reflex. But then I stopped. Something human-centered. A calendar is a series of captured moments, yes, but it's also a sequence of choices. What to remember, who to honor, what deserves space. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about me being cropped from some glossy photo collage. It was about how people like me, people who didn't fit the mold, who didn't follow the script, who spoke too loudly or loved too differently, were edited out of family albums all the time. Not just mine. Everywhere. That night, I pulled out an old hard drive, one I hadn't touched in years, and started digging through folders of photos, pictures I'd taken of friends, of clients, of people I'd met in passing who shared their stories and let me capture them. There was Maria, the single mother from my old building who worked 2 jobs and still made handmade costumes for her kids every Halloween. There was Thomas, a black trans man I met during a tech symposium in Oakland, whose face lit up when he talked about coding as survival. There was Julia, an artist with MS who painted using her feet and laughed harder than anyone I've ever known. I thought of them, and of me, and of everyone who'd ever been told implicitly or directly that their story didn't matter enough to be printed. And the idea crystallized like frost on glass. I'd make a calendar. Not for profit. Not for revenge. But for people like us. A visual declaration. We are here. We deserve to be seen. I stayed up until 3 a.m. sketching layout ideas. 12 months, 12 stories. Each person would get a spread, a portrait, a handwritten quote, a small essay or reflection. No Photoshop, no editing out imperfections. Just truth, complexity, humanity. I didn't know yet how I'd fund it, or print it, or distribute it. But I knew I had to do it. Because when someone crops you out of their picture, they're not just cutting your face, they're erasing your place. And I was done being erased. You never forget the first time you feel invisible in a room full of people who are supposed to love you. It doesn't matter how old you are, how successful, how grounded in your own skin when your own mother skips your name in a toast, when your brother hands out thank you cards to everyone but you, when your sister-in-law posts a family photo captioned, "Everyone I love in one place," and you're sitting 2 chairs away. Something inside you doesn't just ache, it fractures quietly, like a hairline crack in a foundation you didn't realize was crumbling. The thing is, the exclusion didn't start with the calendar. It never does. That was just the most visible symptom of something that had been building quietly for years, like a slow rot behind a wall. Until finally, one day, the drywall gives way and everything you'd painted over it comes crashing down. I remember one afternoon last spring, the 15th of March, actually, my birthday. It was a Tuesday, and I'd taken the day off, told myself I'd do something soft and sweet for myself. Sleep in, buy flowers, go for a walk at Balboa Park, maybe have dinner with friends. But I still held out a flicker of hope, a childish, stubborn kind of hope that someone in my family would remember. A call. A card. A knock at the door with a balloon tied to a wrist. Instead, around 11 a.m., I got a text from Max. "Hey, Britt, quick question. Do you still have that old scanner we used at Dad's party?" No greeting, no happy birthday. Not even a hint of awareness. I stared at the message for a few seconds, rereading it as if maybe some birthday wish was hiding between the lines, tucked into the spaces like a secret. I replied, "Yes. Also, it's my birthday today." 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then an hour. He never responded. That evening, I checked Facebook out of habit. Claire had posted photos of their weekend trip to Napa, all clinking glasses and vineyard smiles, with a caption that read, "So grateful for family and quiet joy." The comments were full of emojis and praise. My mom had written, "Beautiful, my loves." No mention of me. No message, no call. Just silence. That night, I cried not the kind of tears that come from acute pain, but the slow, exhausted kind that come when you realize a door you've been knocking on has been locked from the inside all along. It's hard to explain the specific ache of being left out by people who watched you grow up. The ache of knowing that your parents once kissed your scraped knees and helped you with math homework, but now treat you like an awkward guest they have to tolerate at family functions, someone whose presence complicates the narrative they've built around unity and success. And the worst part? They don't even seem to notice. Or maybe they do, and they just don't care anymore. When did that shift happen? I replayed the years like a movie reel, searching for the moment I stopped being one of them. Was it when I decided not to go to grad school right away and freelanced instead? When I came out to them not with a dramatic announcement, just casually, over dinner at Max's engagement party, when Claire asked if I had a date and I said, her name's Lena and she couldn't make it? Was it when I started talking about ethics in tech, about how our family's investment portfolio included companies with abusive labor practices, and suddenly my dad's face closed off like a door slamming in my face? There were so many moments. Little ones. Small cuts that never healed. Like the time Mom forgot to introduce me to her book club friends. Or when Dad forwarded an email about real jobs in STEM under the subject line, "For Brittany." Or when Rachel sent everyone gifts from her company's PR stash and I was the only one who didn't get a box. And I always made excuses for them. They're busy. They don't understand. They don't mean it. But what I know now, what I've had to learn the hard way, is that neglect wears many faces, and sometimes the softest version of cruelty is simply refusing to see someone, even when they're standing right in front of you. Waving, trying not to cry. I remember sitting at the family table last Thanksgiving with them, though I didn't know it then, and watching as Max passed the mashed potatoes around everyone but me. It wasn't even deliberate, I don't think. It was like I didn't register in his line of sight, like I'd blended into the wallpaper. I ended up reaching across the table myself, knocking over a gravy spoon, and the look Claire gave me tight-lipped, polished annoyance, like I was an inconvenience sent a hot flush crawling up my neck. Mom didn't say anything. Neither did Dad. I laughed it off. I always laughed it off. After dinner, when everyone moved to the living room for coffee and pie, I stayed behind to clear plates. No one noticed. Not until I came out holding a tray and overheard my father say, "She's always been different." That word different echoed in my bones for days. I heard it in every silence, every missed invitation, every polite smile that didn't reach their eyes. Different. Not difficult, not rebellious, just other. Not one of them. And you know what? For a long time, I believed it. That I was different, that something about me made love conditional, made attention optional, made care something I had to earn. But that's the thing about exclusion, it teaches you to fold yourself smaller and smaller until you barely take up space, until being ignored feels normal, until you forget what it's like to be wanted without having to prove your worth. And I was tired of it. So when the calendar photo landed in my inbox, it wasn't a shock. It was confirmation. I had been erased long before that image was cropped. They just finally made it official. You can survive being forgotten once. You can excuse it, chalk it up to busy schedules, chaotic lives, someone's oversight that had nothing to do with your worth, and everything to do with their own disorganization. But when it keeps happening again and again, in different forms, through different people, you begin to understand that this isn't about forgetfulness. It's about priority. It's about position. It's about who matters and who doesn't. And somewhere along the way, I'd slipped from the former into the latter, without warning, without explanation. After the birthday silence, after the calendar omission, the hits kept coming, but quieter now, subtler, like they'd learned to injure without leaving bruises. It started with the group texts. I was no longer in threads that coordinated birthdays, updated everyone on Aunt Sylvia's stroke recovery, planned holidays. I'd only find out when someone accidentally referenced something I wasn't part of, like Max saying, "See you Saturday," when I hadn't been invited, or Mom casually mentioning, "We decided on wine and roast for Easter," when I hadn't even been asked if I'd be there. Each time I pointed it out, the same lines came back, washed in the same saccharine defensiveness. "Oh, I thought Claire added you. It must have slipped our minds. You're always so sensitive, Brit." But it wasn't sensitivity. It was subtraction. Intentional or not, I was being edited out of real time, not just the calendar. I remember one afternoon in early summer when Rachel came into town for the weekend. It was rare. She usually sent gift baskets or called in over Zoom. But this time, she flew in with the twins, and the family organized a welcome back brunch at a vineyard in Temecula. I found out about it from Instagram. Claire had posted a photo: long table, mimosas, smiling faces. My dad standing at the head of the table, raising a glass. The caption said, "Family is everything." I sat on my couch and stared at it, trying to make sense of how you can exist so vividly in someone's memory and yet be so absent from their plans. I texted Mom calmly, not accusatory. "Didn't know Rachel was in town. Hope brunch went well." She replied 10 minutes later. "Oh, sweetheart, it was so last minute. We didn't want to burden you with the drive. Next time, I promise." Burden me. As if being present was a task. As if showing up to something that might have made me feel included was an imposition on them. The moment that finally broke something in merrily, it came in August. Dad had asked us all to come to the house to talk about estate planning. He was formal like that, like to organize things early, like to pretend he was giving us all equal say even though the decisions had already been made. I showed up that Saturday, hair still wet from a rushed shower, heart pounding like it always did before these things. They were already seated in the living room: Dad, Mom, Max, Claire, and Rachel on FaceTime. I was the last to arrive, and no one looked up when I walked in. Dad started with numbers. The house was paid off. His pension was secure. There were 2 IRAs. The cars would go to Max. Just made sense, he said, because Max knew how to take care of that kind of thing. Rachel would receive a portion of the trust through a managed account because, in his words, she's got a lot on her plate with the twins. And me? He glanced at a folder, then looked at me, not unkindly, just distantly. "We thought you'd appreciate something less fixed. You're more of a free spirit." He blinked. "What does that mean?" Mom smiled like she was smoothing over a wrinkle. "We're putting aside a discretionary amount for you, honey. Something flexible." How much?" Dad shifted. "We don't need to get into numbers now. It's more about structure. Rachel and Max have more responsibilities." "Do I not have responsibilities?" I asked, my voice sharper now, brittle with disbelief. "Do you think because I'm single and rent my apartment that I don't?" "It's not personal," Claire cut in, tone clipped, already tired of me. "It's just practical." I laughed too loudly, too bitterly. Funny how practical always means I get less. No one responded. Rachel's face froze on the screen. Max looked at the ceiling like this was beneath him. My parents didn't meet my eyes. I left that meeting hollow. Not because I wanted their money, God, no. But because in that moment, they told me what I was worth. Not in dollars. In recognition. In belonging. They gave the house to Max because he was the son. They gave managed accounts to Rachel because she was a mother. And to me, they offered vagueness and an airy shrug, as though my life didn't require the same stability, the same consideration, the same dignity. It wasn't about the inheritance, it was about the story they were writing without me. The story where I was footnote. Optional. Replaceable. I wish I could say I confronted them, that I stood up and made a speech, that I forced them to see me, but I didn't. I sat there, stunned, like a child in an adult costume, trying to remember when I stopped being someone they protected and started being someone they tolerated. When I got home that night, I opened the folder of calendar mock-ups I'd been working on, and I added a new section, Legacies Left Behind. A spread for stories like mine. For people whose families gave them silence where there should have been structure, distance where there should have been protection. Because I knew now. I wasn't the only one. And if they wouldn't include me in their legacy, I'd make a space where people like me could write their own. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical labor or mental effort but from trying, over and over again, to earn love that should have been unconditional. That's the kind of tired I felt waking up the day after the estate meeting, lying in bed while the early morning sun filtered in through the blinds, casting bars of light across the walls. As if even the daylight had decided to divide me from something softer. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, not quite angry, not quite sad, just drained, like something inside me had been wrung out, leaving only the thinnest threads of resolve keeping me from unraveling altogether. And yet, somehow, despite all the rejection, despite the unfairness that kept stacking up like books no one had the time to read, I still wanted to be seen, not just acknowledged, but truly seen for who I was, not who they assumed me to be, not who they decided I couldn't become. So I tried. Again. I sent a message to Mom the next afternoon. It wasn't long, just a simple note with a photo attached, a picture of me at 6 years old, grinning with a missing front tooth, holding up a glitter-glued Happy Mother's Day card I'd made for her. I wrote, "I found this going through old things. I remember making this while you were sick that week. Just wanted to say I'm thinking of you." She replied 3 hours later. "Oh, I'd forgotten about that. So sweet. Thank you, honey. Claire just brought over muffins. Wish you were here." Oh well. Wish you were here. A phrase that sounded warm on the surface, but was always used like punctuation, soft, empty, a perfumed way of saying, "You're not." And I wasn't. I hadn't been invited, hadn't even known Claire would be visiting. Still, I pressed forward. I tried to reconnect with Max, invited him to lunch at this quiet little bistro halfway between our places, neutral ground, no expectations. He agreed, surprisingly, and for a moment, I let myself hope. We met on a Tuesday, and I showed up early, nervously rearranging the napkin in my lap, wondering if maybe this would be at the turning point, the slow thaw of something that had frozen between us. He arrived 10 minutes late, already checking his watch as he sat down. No hug, no smile, just a nod and a clipped, "Hey." We talked, sort of. I asked about Claire, about the baby, about work. He answered in monosyllables, eyes darting to his phone. When he finally asked about me, it was with that same obligatory tone you use when asking a stranger in an elevator what floor they're headed to. "I'm working on something," I said, trying to keep my voice light, steady. "It's a creative project, kind of a passion thing. A calendar. Featuring people who've been excluded or overlooked in their own families." He raised an eyebrow. "Like a calendar? For misfits?" I smiled tightly. "Something like that." He didn't ask any follow-ups, just nodded like he was humoring a child and said, "That's different," before changing the subject to the stock market. I walked home after that lunch with my hands buried in my coat pockets, not because it was cold, but because I needed somewhere to put the ache. Still, I kept building. I poured myself into the calendar project like it was the only thing holding me together because in a way, it was. Every evening after work, I'd sit with my laptop and sketch layouts, write blurbs, edit portraits. I reached out to people I knew, clients, acquaintances, even followers from an old ethics blog I'd written in grad school. I asked them if they'd be willing to share their stories, moments when they'd been left out, looked over, passed by. The replies trickled in. A woman named Jeannie wrote about being adopted into a family that loved her in public but always made sure she knew she wasn't blood. A man named Aaron shared how his brother got the family business while he was told to follow his dreams, which really meant get lost. A non-binary teenager sent in a photograph of themselves standing in front of a blank Christmas tree, captioned, "I came out in November. They said they were too tired to decorate this year." Hi. Their stories broke me and mended me at once. Because in every sentence, I saw my own reflection. I began to feel less alone, not just in my pain, but in my resistance. These people had also stayed quiet for too long. They had smiled at dinners where they weren't welcome, attended weddings they weren't in, held hands with lovers their parents pretended not to see. And still, they loved. They showed up. They kept giving. Just like me. I printed a few test copies of the calendar through a local press in Echo Park. The paper was thick, almost velvety. The The colors came out rich and real. No filters, no airbrushing. Just raw, honest faces and brave, unpolished words. I mailed one to my parents. No note. Just the calendar. A week passed. Then two. No reply. I finally texted Mom, casual. Did you get the calendar? She responded the next day. Yes, we did. Very unique. Not really our thing, but we're glad you're doing something creative. Claire thought it was interesting. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling something in me curl inward. Not because I needed their approval, but because I had hoped, foolishly, for something more than interesting. I had wanted them to recognize the piece of my soul I had handed them, trembling and raw, and instead they responded like I'd sent a flyer for a garage sale. But I didn't stop. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that mattered. Something that could live outside their approval. Something that gave voice to people like me cropped out, dismissed, underestimated, and turned that pain into something visible, something permanent. And maybe, just maybe, something powerful. There's a certain silence that comes before confrontation, not peace, not calm, but the cold stillness of a room waiting to detonate. The kind that wraps itself around your ribs and squeezes every time someone clears their throat or shifts in their seat, and I felt that silence settle over me the moment I walked into my parents' house that Saturday. Invited, if you could even call it that, for what Mom described over the phone as a little chat over lunch, her tone breezy, but too practiced, too tight. I knew it wasn't about lunch. You don't gather 4 adults and one sullen teenage niece on short notice for sandwiches and iced tea unless something's brewing. Unless something unspoken has finally swollen to the point it can't be ignored. And the moment I saw Max standing by the fireplace with his arms crossed, Claire seated beside Mom with her legs primly tucked, and Dad nursing his bourbon before noon, I knew this wasn't a chat, it was a tribunal. They didn't even wait for me to sit down. Brittany. Dad began, his voice low but firm, the same tone he used when explaining interest rates or car maintenance, that calm male confidence that said, I know more than you, and I'm being patient. We need to talk about this calendar of yours. He blinked. Claire jumped in before I could respond. You sent one to Grandma. Did you know that? She called us in tears. She thought it was a cry for help. I frowned, confused. What do you mean? It's a celebration of real people. People who've been excluded, overlooked. It's not. It's disturbing, Brittany. Max interrupted, his jaw tight. You've got strangers talking about abandonment and being left out by their families. What did you expect us to think? I looked at them, baffled. It's not about you. You featured a woman who wrote about being cut out of a will, Mom said, her voice sharp now, brittle, rising. Do you not realize how that looks, coming after the estate discussion? She wasn't talking about our family. I shot back, my heart starting to race, voice thickening with disbelief. You think I'm airing your dirty laundry? I'm telling stories, real ones. And if any of it feels familiar, maybe that's something you should sit with. Silence. Rachel's face flickered on FaceTime. She hadn't spoken yet, but her pursed lips said enough. Finally, she unmuted. Brittany, I get that you feel disconnected or whatever, but do you really think turning yourself into a victim and publishing it helps anything? You made our whole family look dysfunctional. I laughed, harsh and humorless. You haven't been around for a single holiday in 5 years, and now you want to lecture me about appearances? Claire shifted, like she wanted to be anywhere else. Mom stood suddenly and began clearing dishes that weren't even there, an old trick, a way to manage tension by pretending it was dust on a plate or crumbs on a napkin. I just wish you'd come to us first, she murmured, before making something so public. I did, I said, softer now, the fight in me not gone, but tired. I've been trying to come to you for years. You just don't hear me unless I say it loud. Dad set down his glass with a clink. You're not a child anymore, Brittany. You can't just throw tantrums and call it art. That one hit harder than I expected, not because it was cruel, but because it was so familiar, so deeply rooted in the pattern of how they'd always viewed me. Dramatic, reactive, impossible to please. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat, reminded myself not to cry in this house, not here, not now. I'm not throwing a tantrum, I said slowly, each word deliberate. I'm building something because you gave me nothing to hold on to. Then, Rachel sighed through the screen. You always make everything about you. And that was it. That was the sentence, the one I'd heard versions of since I was 14 and asked why Max never got grounded, why no one ever came to my piano recital, why I was expected to apologize first even when I was the one crying. You always make everything about you. That line didn't mean I was selfish. It meant I was inconvenient. It meant I didn't know my place. It meant I wasn't allowed to feel pain unless it could be folded neatly into someone else's comfort. I stood up. I came here because I thought maybe you'd try to understand, I said, voice trembling despite everything I'd practiced in my head. But I see now that understanding was never the point. You just want me to be quiet. No one contradicted me. No one stood up to follow when I walked toward the front door. And I didn't turn back, not when I grabbed my keys, not when Bishop's carrier bumped against my leg on the way out, not even when I heard Claire say under her breath, "This is why we can't include her in things." That one stung. But it didn't stop me. Because as I walked to my car, the air sticky and hot with late August heat, I realized something that changed everything. They weren't mad because I lied. They were mad because I told the truth out loud. There are kinds of silence no one warns you about, the kind that settles in after the last door has closed and the last word has been said, not loudly, not even cruelly, but with enough cold precision that you know there's no invitation back, not really, and the world doesn't end in screaming or slamming or spectaculate, just quiets, so completely, so finally, that even your thoughts start speaking in whispers. That was the silence I sat in for days after the confrontation. I stopped checking my phone because I already knew no one was reaching out. I didn't log into social media because I couldn't bear to see their lives moving on without pause, without so much as a ripple from my absence. I let the calendar proofs sit on my desk, untouched, because suddenly they felt like artifacts from a version of me I wasn't sure existed anymore, the bold version, the brave version, the one who believed that telling the truth could set anything free. I thought about deleting the project. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't even let myself open the files. But the thought lingered like a shadow across everything I did. What's the point if the people you most want to see you would rather look away? And then came the night I realized I hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 full days, not a single phone call, not a text, not even a brief exchange with the barista at the coffee shop down the street, because I hadn't left the apartment, hadn't changed out of the same pair of sweatpants, hadn't even brushed my hair. I lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling like it owed me an explanation. Bishop curled beside me, purring softly, the only heartbeat in the room besides mine. My chest felt heavy, not in the poetic way people describe heartbreak, but in the actual, physical sense, like something large and wet was sitting on top of my ribs, pressing down, refusing to let me breathe properly unless I acknowledged what was really happening. I wasn't just sad. I was lost. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way, but in the quiet, cruel kind of lost that sneaks up on you when every compass you've used to navigate your life, family, love, legacy suddenly spins aimlessly and points nowhere. I thought of reaching out to Annie, sweet, well-meaning Annie, who always tried to stay neutral, but even that felt too fragile, too risky. Like I couldn't survive another well-intentioned brush-off or a sentence that started with, "I understand, but..." So I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter. Handwritten. On actual paper. Not to send, not to show anyone. Just to remember what it felt like to speak freely, without interruption, without judgment, without being told I was too much or too sensitive or making it about myself. I wrote to myself. I wrote, "Dear Brittany, I see you. I believe you. I know what you gave. I know what you tried. I know how many birthdays you remembered, how many compromises you made, how many times you showed up even when no one noticed or thanked you. I know how badly you wanted to be part of something that didn't want to make room for you." I wrote, "They may never understand, they may never apologize, but you are not invisible, and you are not wrong for wanting to matter. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I cried not out of rage or frustration or even heartbreak, but from the overwhelming flood of finally admitting just how deeply I had been hurt. How long I had carried the weight of being the family disappointment, the complicated one, the outsider who kept trying to get back in through a door that was never left open for her. I cried because I missed them. Because no matter how justified I was, no matter how righteous my truth felt, I still wanted my mother to call and say she was proud. I still wanted Max to text a photo of his daughter with a caption that read, "She misses her aunt." I still wanted to hear Dad's voice crack just a little when he said my name. But none of that was coming. And so I wept, alone in my apartment, the cat curled against my hip, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the world, and I let the grief take its shape, ugly, shuddering, full-bodied grief for the family I had, for the love I'd begged for, and for the terrifying possibility that maybe I would never belong anywhere I didn't build from scratch with my own bare hands. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat with the ache, let it echo through the empty rooms of me. And in that long, sleepless dark, I understood something that hadn't fully crystallized before. This wasn't about winning them back. It wasn't even about recognition anymore. It was about survival. Because sometimes, survival isn't rising like a phoenix. Sometimes, survival is curling into yourself until the storm passes, whispering, "You're still here," even when everything feels broken. And in the morning, when the sun started bleeding through the cracks in the curtains, I stood up, washed my face, and opened the calendar files again. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it still mattered. Sometimes clarity doesn't arrive as light, it arrives as fire. Not a gentle glow of understanding, but a sudden, searing flame that burns through the fog you've been living in, illuminating the sharp edges of the things you didn't want to see. The things you've been too afraid to name, and when it comes, you can't look away, not because it's beautiful, but because it's finally, painfully honest. It started with a call from Annie. Not a text, not a forwarded meme or an emoji-laced check-in, but an actual call, her name flashing on my phone while I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by the last few sample calendars I had convinced myself I didn't care about anymore. I answered with a brittle voice, expecting small talk. But what she said made the room tilt. "I didn't want to tell you this," she began, hesitant, the kind of hesitance that meant she had already decided to tell me but was still trying to protect herself from the fallout. "But I think you deserve to know." There was a second group chat. My stomach turned. "Besides family core?" She sighed. "Yeah. There's another one. It's mostly just Rachel, Max, Claire, and your parents. It started a couple of years ago, around the time you came out. I felt something shift in my chest, not a crack this time, but a hollow echo, like something old and long buried suddenly rang true. "What do they say?" I asked quietly, not even sure I wanted to know. There was a pause. Then, "I've only seen a few screenshots. But it's not good, Britt. They joke about you. They talk about your drama, your projects." Claire called the calendar a trauma scrapbook. Rachel said you were always emotionally manipulative. Max made some comment about how, at least you didn't try to sue for your part of the inheritance like a certain someone. The room spun. I pressed the heel of my hand to my forehead, trying to block the sudden heat rising behind my eyes. "And my parents?" More silence. Then Annie whispered, "Your mom said you've always been exhausting to love." That did it. The tears didn't come out yet, but the noise inside me, the buzzing ache that had hummed under every rejection, every exclusion, every half-hearted reply and gaslit silence, it finally collapsed into something sharp, something undeniable. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had been actively writing me out. This wasn't passive indifference. This was strategy. I sat with it for a long time after Annie hung up, her voice cracking with guilt as she begged me not to tell them she'd said anything, and I promised I wouldn't, because she'd given me something far more valuable than revenge, just given me the truth. And with the truth came fury. Not the reckless kind that lashes out blindly, but the cold, focused kind, the kind that makes you stand taller, breathe deeper, and decide, with full clarity, that you are done asking for space in someone else's home when you can build your own. So I got to work. Really got to work. I pulled out the calendar files and restructured the whole campaign. This wasn't just a side project anymore. It was a declaration. I renamed it the Cropped Project. 12 months. 12 stories. One unifying theme. Voices once left out now front and center. I rewrote the introduction to include a piece of my story, not all of it, not the rawest parts, but enough to say, this isn't theoretical, this is personal. I built a website overnight, basic but clean, and uploaded the calendar mockups. Then I opened pre-orders with a goal of 50. I hit that within 3 hours. By midnight, I had over 300. Message started pouring in. People I hadn't heard from in years, strangers from across the country, even a few overseas, all telling me versions of the same story. I thought it was just me. I thought I was alone. I thought maybe I was the problem. I cried reading those. Not the kind of tears I'd shed on the floor a week before, but something different, tears that came from recognition, from finally being seen, not by the people who had erased me, but by the ones who had also been erased and knew how much that hurt, how hard it was to keep believing in your own story when no one around you did. I got a DM from a therapist in Portland asking to order 10 for her practice. A school counselor in New Jersey asked if she could use it for a student art project. A librarian in Minnesota wanted to feature it in their Queer Voices collection. And then, something even more unexpected. A journalist from a local art and activism blog reached out, asking to interview me. That interview went live 2 days later. The headline read, "She was cropped from her family's calendar." So she created one that went viral. Oh. It included a photo of me taken on my balcony at sunset, Bishop curled on the railing beside me, eyes tired but clear, holding the calendar like a statement. And then, things exploded. More orders. More messages. More stories. It was beautiful. It was overwhelming. It was real. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't begging to be seen. I was seen. Not because I shouted. Not because I forced it. But because I stopped hiding. Because I told the truth even when it made people uncomfortable, even when it cost me their love, even when it broke me open. And from that broken place, something entirely mine began to grow. It happened the following Sunday. I hadn't planned it, not really, but when I opened my inbox and saw the email from Mom with the subject line, "Disappointed in you," and the body text no longer than a sentence. We saw the article, "I hope you're happy." Something inside me clicked into place, not with rage, but with an eerie kind of calm. The kind of stillness that comes right before you walk into the fire, not because you want to burn, but because you're done running from heat. So I called her. And I asked one question. "Can I come over?" She hesitated for a moment too long, like she was scanning for an excuse, then finally said, "Fine. But don't make a scene." "Oh." And I smiled to myself because I knew then finally, unquestionably, that they were scared of what I'd say out loud. Not because I was wrong, but because they knew I wasn't. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had: neatly trimmed hedges, wind chimes on the porch, the faint sound of classical music humming through the windows. But I felt none of the old comfort, none of the soft nostalgia I used to cling to like a child still hoping to be welcomed home. The door opened before I knocked. "Claire." She didn't smile, just stepped aside and muttered, "They're in the living room." As I walked past her, I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something expensive, floral, a little sharpened. It hit me how little I actually knew her, despite all the years of sitting at the same table, exchanging birthday cards, pretending to be sisters. Max was on the couch, arms folded, jaw tight. Dad stood by the window, nursing a drink even though it was barely noon. Rachel's face flickered again on FaceTime, propped up on the side table like some disembodied judge summoned for the occasion. And Mom sat in the armchair, spine rigid, fingers fidgeting with the edge of a napkin like she was preparing for battle. I stood in the center of the room, holding nothing, rehearsing nothing. And I said, "So, you read the article?" And one, Dad scoffed quietly, turning toward the window like I wasn't worth the energy. Rachel said, "We just want to know why, Brittany. Why drag the whole family through the mud? Publicly." And there it was, the word they all kept using like a shield, publicly, as if the sin wasn't what had happened, but that I had dared to speak of it where others might hear. "I didn't drag you through anything," I said, steady, clear. "I told my story, mine. And if any part of that feels like a mirror, that's not my fault." Max muttered. "You could have just talked to us. Privately." I turned to him, pulse pounding. "I did. For years. And you all ignored me, minimized me, laughed behind my back. You made a group chat to make sure I wouldn't see what you really thought of me." Claire stiffened. "You don't know what was in that chat." I looked at her, unwavering. "I know enough. Annie told me. She showed me the screenshots." The room froze. Dad turned then, eyes narrowing. "You went behind our backs?" "No," I said. "You went behind mine. For years. And now you're angry I found the receipts." Rachel's voice, tinny through the phone, cut in like a blade. "So, this is what you're doing now? Turning on your own family because you didn't get a photo in a calendar?" And suddenly, it wasn't enough to hold back. Because I had swallowed so much for so long, so many eye rolls, so many silences, so many dismissals thinly veiled as jokes, that the truth burst out before I could even choose the words. This was never about a damn calendar. This is about every time I was treated like a placeholder. Every time I was left out and made to believe it was my fault. Every time I was expected to be quiet, to shrink, to accommodate your discomfort. I didn't turn on anyone. I stopped pretending. "Oh, sick." Mom finally spoke then, her voice trembling, not with emotion, but with that same exhausted indignation she always summoned when the world didn't bend her way. "You've always been dramatic, Brittany. Ever since you were a child, always so intense, always needing more than we could give." And I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized maybe for the first time that she didn't hate me. She just didn't know how to love someone she couldn't control. "You didn't have to give me everything," I said softly. "You just had to try." Claire scoffed. "You think we're the villains in your little story?" "No," I said, voice firm, unshaking. "I think you're people who made choices, and now I'm making mine." Dad stepped forward then, setting his glass down a little too loudly. "Brittany, enough. You made your point. You embarrassed us. You got your attention." That's when the tears came, not mine, but my mother's. Quiet at first, then steadier, her shoulders folding inward as she stared at her hands, no longer the composed matriarch, just a woman unraveling. "You made me look like a bad mother," she whispered. And I felt something deep inside me break again, but not in despair. In release. Because for the first time, I didn't rush to fix it. I didn't apologize. I didn't comfort. I just said, "Then maybe ask yourself why the truth looked so ugly." No one spoke after that. Not for a long minute. Not even Rachel. And then I turned. I didn't ask for hugs or forgiveness. I didn't leave a door open. I just walked out slowly, purposefully, and with each step, I felt the weight lift, not completely, but enough to breathe. Because I had said everything. Because they had heard it. And because this time, they couldn't say I hadn't tried. Victory doesn't always look like someone groveling. Sometimes, it looks like silence, the kind that follows truth when no one can argue with it anymore. When the performance of decency has been ripped away and all that's left is the echo of the thing they didn't want to admit, the thing you forced them to see. And sometimes, victory doesn't feel like joy or vindication, it feels like breath, like finally being able to stand without bracing for impact. After I walked out of that living room, I didn't look back. I didn't text to smooth things over. I didn't follow up with a link to a TED Talk or a soft-toned article on emotional labor. I didn't send them the next edition of the calendar. I didn't check to see if they were watching from a distance. I just kept walking toward my life, toward the people who had started showing up for me in ways that felt stunningly simple and radically whole. The Cropped project had sold out within the first 2 weeks. We did a second printing, then a third. By the time a local art space reached out asking to do a gallery installation featuring the photos and stories from the calendar, I had stopped waiting for validation from my family and started building something entirely outside of them. And the world, unexpectedly, opened. People sent me letters, real ones, in handwriting that trembled and swirled, from teenagers in small towns and retirees in cities, from people who had walked out of homes like mine and never been invited back in, who told me, "Your story gave me permission to stop begging." One woman wrote, "I hung your calendar in my kitchen even though my mother says it's too heavy." For once, I chose truth over her comfort. A man emailed to say, "I bought one for every member of my chosen family. We cried together when we saw it." And each message stitched something back together in meslowly, tenderly, like the very community I thought I'd lost had been waiting for me to stop hiding, to stand still long enough for them to find me. Then came the email that changed everything. It was from a producer at a national podcast, the kind that told human interest stories with quiet music and soft, reflective narration, the kind that gave weight to voices often ignored. She said she'd read about the calendar and listened to my interview. She wanted to feature me, not just the project, but the journey, your voice, your fracture, your strength. I said yes. The recording took 2 days. I cried in the studio, my voice cracking as I read passages from the letters, as I described the ache of being cut out not with knives but with omission. The producer, a woman named Ellen, told me afterward, "You didn't just make a calendar. You made a home for grief that never had one." That episode aired on a Wednesday. By Thursday, my inbox was a waterfall. A small publishing house reached out, asking if I'd consider turning the Cropped project into a book, something part memoir, part anthology. A therapist emailed asking to collaborate on a workbook version for clients navigating family estrangement. A major online magazine offered me a column to write about generational disconnect, healing, and storytelling. And on Friday, something strange happened. I got a text from Max. It was short, awkward. "Saw the podcast. Didn't expect that. Hope you're okay." I stared at it for a while. Not because I believed it was a step toward healing, but because I knew clearly now what it really meant. He wasn't reaching out because he was sorry. He was reaching out because the story had left our living room. Because it had grown too loud to ignore. And for once, I didn't respond. Not out of malice, but because I didn't need to. The consequence wasn't public shaming. It was irrelevance. They had chosen to cut me out of their world. And now my world had grown so far beyond theirs that their opinions didn't carry weight anymore. That, I realized, was the true reversal. Not revenge. Not vindication. But independence, or radical, emotional, irreversible independence. I was no longer waiting for the phone to ring. I was no longer hoping for a seat at their table. I had built my own. And at that table sat people who had cried with me, laughed with me, offered their stories not as currency but as solidarity. And slowly, my life reshaped itself. I did more interviews, not to be seen, but to amplify the voices I had once only whispered with. I began leading workshops on narrative healing, helping others shape their own stories, turn their pain into presence. I started sleeping better. I began laughing again, not politely, not guarded, but with my whole chest. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and poured orange across my balcony, I sat with a glass of wine and reread the first letter I'd written to myself in the dark of despair. "Dear Brittany, I see you." And I smiled. Because now I wasn't the only one who did. There's a quiet that comes after the storm, but it's not the same silence I knew before, not the stifling, brittle silence of avoidance and rejection, but something gentler, wider. A hush filled with possibility rather than fear, the kind that fills your chest when you realize, finally, you are no longer waiting for someone else to name you, include you, approve of you. You are just here, alive, unchanged by their verdict, made whole by your own voice and the soft strength of people who show up without needing to be begged. The weeks after the podcast aired moved fast and slow in equal measure. I spoke at a small independent bookstore in Portland, and during the Q&A, a woman stood up, maybe late 60s, graying hair pulled back, voice trembling, and she said, Your story helped me walk away from a family that always told me I was too much. I left at 64. I thought it was too late. You showed me it's not. Oh, we both cried. And that moment sat with me, long after the applause faded, long after the photos were taken and the book signed and the calendar prints handed out. It reminded me that healing doesn't always mean reconciling. Sometimes, it just means not feeling crazy anymore. I moved apartments. Nothing dramatic, just a few blocks over, closer to a co-op grocery and a little patch of grass where Bishop could stretch out in the sun. My new place had tall windows and uneven floorboards, and the kind of charm you only notice when you're not trying to impress anyone with square footage. I bought real curtains. I started cooking again. Not because anyone was coming over, but because I liked the smell of garlic on my hands. I took longer walks. I started sleeping without checking my phone for missed messages from people who never messaged. And something in my posture changed. I noticed it in Photoshop. My shoulders didn't curl inward the way they used to. How my face, once always half-guarded, now looked open, even in candid shots. Like I'd stopped bracing for impact and started expecting light. Annie and I grew closer. She came to one of my gallery nights, stood in front of a photo of a woman named Lonnie, who'd written about being forced out of her home at 17, and said quietly, "I see so much of you in this." Oh, She didn't apologize again for what she hadn't said, and she didn't need to. Because sometimes the truest form of apology is showing up different next time. We had dinner once a week after that, sometimes with wine, sometimes in silence, sometimes with Bishop climbing over our laps and interrupting whatever attempt we made at watching a movie. It was, in every way, a small, imperfect, beautiful life. And then, one afternoon, I got a letter. A real letter. Handwritten. From my mother. The envelope had my name in her cursive study, familiar, and for a long moment, I didn't open it. I just sat with it in my hands, feeling the weight of all the words we hadn't said, all the years we'd filled with conditional love and polite omission. Eventually, I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the paper. She wrote, "Brittany, I don't know how to say any of this right. I've rewritten this a dozen times, but I owe you something real. I read your interview. I listened to the podcast. At first, I was angry. Then I was ashamed. Because I recognized myself in every line you didn't name. I don't know when I stopped hearing you. Maybe I never really started. But I remember the first time you ever looked at me with disappointment. You were 13, and I told you to change clothes because your shirt was too loud. You didn't say anything then, but the way your face changed haunts me even now. You didn't deserve the weight we put on you. I see that now. And I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if this will reach you in time to matter. But I needed to say it. I needed to say that you were never too much. We were just too small to hold you. Love, Mom." I didn't cry. I just sat there, reading it again and again, feeling the strange ache of someone arriving too late, but still bringing a lantern to the edge of the path. I didn't call her. I didn't rush to reply. But I wrote her back. 3 sentences. "Thank you for hearing me. I'm okay now. I hope you are too." And I mailed it. Not as an opening, not as a return, but as a punctuation mark. Because not every story needs to circle back to where it started. Some need to be closed, cleanly, so new ones can be written in their place. I still work as a tech ethics consultant, though these days I speak more often than I advise. I stand on stages and tell stories my own, and others. I talk about visibility, about the cost of silence, about what it means to be cropped, not from pictures, but from the shape of your own history. And people listen. Not because I'm extraordinary, but because I'm finally saying the things we all keep tucked inside, those raw, burning truths we're afraid will make us unlovable. And every time I speak them aloud, someone comes up afterward and says, "Thank you. I thought I was the only one." I'm not. I never was. And neither are you. I still keep a copy of that first calendar on my desk. The cover is a little worn now, corners curling from being thumbed so many times, but it's still whole, still bold. Still unapologetically full of faces that weren't chosen for being perfect, but for being real. And that's enough for me. More than enough. Because in the end, I wasn't just cropped from their calendar. I made my own. And it didn't just sell out. It set me free. If you had told me a year ago that I'd find peace not in reconciliation, not in being invited back, but in walking away without bitterness, I wouldn't have believed you. Because I thought healing had to look like hugs and homecomings, like a seat saved at the table, like a phone ringing with overdue apologies. I thought resolution was something you got from someone else. But what I've learned slowly, painfully, beautifully is that sometimes healing is not the arrival of something you've been waiting for. Sometimes, healing is the soft decision to stop waiting. To stop knocking on the door that never opens, to stop twisting yourself into shapes that fit someone else's narrative, to stop asking people who benefit from your silence to help you find your voice. And that's what I did. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But one moment at a time. I stopped pretending the absence didn't hurt. I stopped calling love complicated when it was really just inconsistent. I stopped telling myself it was okay to be cropped out as long as I kept being patient, or kind, or quiet. Because I realized something I had been afraid to name. I was not hard to love. I was hard to manipulate. And that's why they tried to erase me. Because I remembered too much. Because I named what others refused to admit. Because I didn't play along when the family photos were staged, when the stories were retold with edits that served comfort over truth. And when I stopped performing, they made space without me. But that space, that painful, echoing absence they left behind, became something new. It became a place I filled with people who showed up not because I earned it, but because I existed. People who didn't flinch at my tears. Who didn't call me dramatic for having boundaries. Who didn't make me feel small when I dared to take up space. People who knew what it meant to be othered and chose, together, to become something like family anyway. We built our own table. With mismatched chairs and chipped mugs and loud laughter and hard truths and soft forgiveness. And no one was cropped out. I keep thinking about legacy, what it really means. What we leave behind when we stop trying to leave behind the version of ourselves others wanted us to be. I used to believe legacy was inheritance, was approval, was tradition passed down like a family recipe. But now I think it's something quieter. Maybe legacy is the feeling someone gets when they remember your story and feel less alone. Maybe it's the email from a stranger who says, "Your words helped me breathe differently." Maybe it's the child who sees their parent cry over a calendar not because it's sad, but because it's true. Maybe it's building a life that's not impressive to people who never cared, but deeply nourishing to those who do. There are still days I ache. Not because I want to go back, but because I remember the version of me who kept hoping they'd change. She tried so hard. She kept calling, kept apologizing, kept shrinking. And I love her for that. She got me here. But I don't live in her world anymore. Now, when I see families laughing together in restaurants or people posting holiday photos with long captions about unity and gratitude, I no longer feel like I've failed at something fundamental. I just know that some people are lucky enough to be born into homes that hold them. And the rest of us? We learn to build our own. Brick by brick. Voice by voice. Memory by memory. We build them from grief and grace and good stories. We build them by choosing each other intentionally, consistently, fiercely. And we never crop anyone out.